Welcome to the DragonLance Saga Gaming Advanced Dungeons & Dragons episode. This is the 7th episode in the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide series. It has been years since I did this. So I figure at some point I should go back and finish reading the Dungeon Master's Guide. And then I'd like to do the Monster Manual, and I'd like to do all the different, the Wilderness Guide, the Dungeon Survival Guide, all sorts of fun stuff. That's what I want to do. Anyway, I'll get to it eventually. It is Misham Dark Ember the 13th. My name is Adam, and today I'm just continuing this. So Dragonlance came out of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, so I thought it'd be fun to read the core rules aloud and discuss them with the live audience, assuming anyone ever tunes into something like this. I would like to take a moment and thank the members and patrons and invite you to consider becoming a member or patron. You can also pick up Dragonlance Gaming materials using my affiliate links. There's plural. And of course, all those links are in the description below. All right, so years ago, we left off with the campaign. So let's get into it. The campaign. Actually, I'm going to do notes here. Time check notes. Unlike most games, AD&D is an ongoing collection of episodic adventures, each of which constitutes a session of play. You, as the Dungeon Master, are about to embark on a new career, that of Universe Maker. You will order the universe and direct the activities in each game, becoming one of the elite group of campaign referees referred to as DMs in the vernacular of AD&D. What lies ahead will require the use of all of your skill, put a strain on your imagination, bring your creativity to the fore, test your patience, and exhaust your free time. Being a DM is no matter to be taken lightly. Your campaign requires the above from you and participation by your players. To belabor an old saw, Rome wasn't built in a day. You're probably just learning, so take small steps at first. The milieu for initial adventures should be kept to a size commensurate to the needs of campaign participants, your available time as compared with the demands of the players. This will typically result in your giving them a brief background, placing them in a settlement, and stating that they should prepare themselves to find and explore the dungeon ruin they know is nearby. As background, you inform them that they are from some nearby place where they were apprentices learning their respective professions, that they met by chance in an inn or tavern and resolved to journey together to seek their fortunes in the dangerous environment, and that beyond the knowledge common to the area, speech, alignments, races, and the like, they know nothing of the world. Place these new participants in a small settlement means that you need do only minimal work describing the place and its inhabitants. Likewise, as player characters are inexperienced, a single dungeon or ruins map will suffice to begin play. After a few episodes of play, you and your campaign participants will be ready for expansion of the milieu. The territory around the settlement, likely the home city or town of the adventurers, and other nearby habitations, wilderness areas, and whatever else you determine is right for the area, should be sketch mapped, and places likely to become settings for play actually done in detail. At this time, it is probable that you'll have to have a large-scale map of the whole continent or subcontinent involved, some rough outlines of the political divisions of the place, notes on predominant terrain features, indications of the distribution of creature types, and some plans as to what conflicts are likely to occur. In short, you will have to create the social and ecological parameters of a good part of a make-believe world. The more painstakingly this is done, the more real this creation will become. Eventually, as player characters develop and grow powerful, they will explore and adventure all of the area of the continent. When such activity begins, you must then broaden your general map still farther, so as to encompass the whole globe. More still, you must begin to consider seriously the makeup of your entire multiverse, space, planets and their satellites, parallel worlds, the dimensions and planes. What is there? Why? Can participants in the campaign get there? How? Will they? Never fear. By the time your campaign has grown to such a state of sophistication, you will be ready to handle the new demands. Setting things in motion. There is nothing wrong with using a prepared setting to start a campaign, just as long as you're totally familiar with its precepts and the mesh with what you envision as the ultimate direction of your own milieu. Whatever doesn't match, remove from the material and substitute your own in its place. On the other hand, there's nothing to say you are not capable of creating your own starting place. Just use whatever method is best suited to your available time and more likely to please your players. Until you are sure of yourself, lean upon the book. Improvisation might be fine later, but until you are completely relaxed as a DM, don't run the risk of trying to wing it unless absolutely necessary. Set up the hamlet or village where the action will commence with the player characters entering and interacting with the local population. Place regular people, some different and unusual types, and a few non-player characters, NPCs, in the various dwellings and places of business. Note vital information particular to each. Stock the goods available to the players. When they arrive, you'll be ready to take on the persona of the settlement as a whole, as well as that of each individual therein. Be dramatic, witty, stupid, dull, clever, dishonest, tricky, hostile, etc., as the situation demands. The players will quickly learn who is who and what is going on, perhaps at the loss of a few coins. Having handled this, their characters will be equipped as well as circumstances will allow, and will be ready for their bold journey into the dangerous place where treasure abounds and monsters lurk. The testing grounds for novice adventurers must be kept to a difficult factor which encourages rather than discourages players. If they're too easy, then there's no challenge and boredom sets in after 1 or 2 games. Conversely, impossible difficulty and character deaths cause instant loss of interest. Entrance to and movement through the dungeon level should be relatively easy with a few tricks, traps, and puzzles to make it interesting in itself. Features such as rooms and chambers must be described with verve and sufficiently detailed in content to make them each seem as if they were strange and mysterious. Creatures inhabiting the place must be of strength and in numbers, not excessive compared to the adventurer's wherewithal to deal with them. You may at this point refer to the sample dungeon level and partial encounter key. The general idea is to develop a dungeon of multiple levels, and the deeper adventurers go, the more difficult the challenges become. Fiercer monsters, more deadly traps, more confusing mazes, and so forth. This same concept applies to areas outdoors as well, with more and terrible monsters occurring more frequently the further one goes away from civilization. Many varied on dungeons and wilderness areas are possible. One can build an ongoing complex where distance away from the entry point approximates depth, or it can be in a mountain where adventurers work upwards. Outdoor adventures can be in a ruined city or a town, which seems normal but is under a curse, or virtually anything you can imagine, and then develop it into a playable situation for your campaign participants. Whatever you settle on as a starting point, be it your own design or one of the many modular settings which are commercially available, remember to have some overall plan of your milieu in mind. The campaign might grow slowly, or it might mushroom. Be prepared for either event with more adventure areas and the reasons for everything which exists and happens. This is not to say that total and absolutely perfect information will be needed, but a general schema is required. From this, you can give vague hints and ambiguous answers. It's no exaggeration to state that the fantasy world builds itself, almost as if the milieu actually takes on a life and reality of its own. This is not to say that an occult power takes over. It's simply that the interaction of judge and players shapes the bare bones of the initial creation into something far larger. It becomes fleshed out, and adventuring breathes life into a make-believe world. Similarly, the geography and history you assign to the world will suddenly begin to shape the character of states and peoples. Details of former events that will become obvious from mere outlines of the past course of things Surprisingly, as the personalities of player characters and non-player characters in the milieu are bound to develop and become almost real, the nations and states and events of a well-conceived AD&D world will take on even more of their own direction and life. What this all boils down to is that once the campaign is set in motion, you will become more of a recorder of events, while the milieu seemingly charts its own course. Climate and ecology. It is of utmost importance to some dungeon masters to create and design worlds which are absolutely correct according to the laws of the scientific realities of our own universe. These individuals will have to look elsewhere for direction as to how this can be accomplished, for this is a rule book, not a text on any subject remotely connected to climatology, ecology, or any scientific science, soft or hard. However, for those who desire only an interesting and exciting game, some useful information in the way of advice can be passed along. Climate. Temperature, wind, and rainfall are understood reasonably well by most people. The distance from the sun dictates temperature, with the directness of the sun's rays affecting this also. Cloud cover also is a factor, heavy clouds trapping heat to cause a greenhouse effect. Elevation is a factor, as the higher mountains have less of an atmosphere blanket. Bodies of water affect temperature, as do warm or cold currents within them. Likewise, air currents affect temperatures. Winds are determined by rotational direction and thermals. Rainfall depends upon winds and available moisture from bodies of water and temperatures as well. All of the foregoing are relevant to our world and should be in a fantasy world, but the variations determinants need not follow the physical laws of the earth. A milieu which offers different climates is quite desirable because of the variety it affords DM and player alike. The variety of climes also allows you to offer the whole gamut of human and monster types to adventurous character. It also allows you more creativity with civilizations, societies, and cultures. Ecology. So many of the monsters are large predators that it is difficult to justify their existence in proximity to one another. Of course, in dungeon settings, it is possible to have some in stasis or magically kept alive without hunger. But what of the wilderness? Then, too, how do the human and humanoid populations support themselves? The bottom of the food chain is vegetation, cultivated grain with respect to people and their ilk. Large populations in relatively small land areas must be supported by lavish vegetation. Herd animals prospering upon this growth will support a fair number of predators. Consider also the tails of many of the most fantastic and fearsome beasts. What do dragons eat? Humans, of course. Maidens in particular. Dragons slay a lot, but they do not seem to eat all that much. Ogres and giants enjoy livestock and people too, but at least the more intelligent sort raise their own cattle so as to guarantee a full kettle. While you develop your world, leave plenty of area for cultivation, even more for wildlife. Indicate the general sorts of creatures inhabiting an area using logic with regard to natural balance. This is not to say that you must be in textbook perfect. It's merely a cautionary word to remind you not to put too many large carnivores without any visible means of support. Some participants in your campaign might question the ecology, particularly if it does not favor their favorite player characters. You must be prepared to justify it. Here are some suggestions. Certain vegetation grows very rapidly in the world. Roots or tubers, grass-like plant or grain, one or more of such crops support many rabbits or herd animals or wild pigs or people or whatever you like. The vegetation springs up due to a nutrient in the soil, possibly some element unknown in the mundane world, and possibly due to the radiation of the sun as well. See the slight tinge of color which is noticeably different when compared to Sol? A species or two of herbivores which grow rapidly, breed prolifically, and need but scant nutrient is also suggested. With these artifices and a bit of care in placing monsters around in the wilderness, you'll probably satisfy all but the most exacting of players, and that one probably should not be playing fantasy games anyway. Dungeons, likewise, might be balanced and justified, or else wildly improbable, and caused by some supernatural entity which keeps the whole thing running, or at least has set it up to run until another stops it. In any event, do not allow either the demands of realism or impossible make-believe to spoil your milieu. Climate and ecology are simply reminders to use a bit of care. Typical inhabitants. The bulk of the people met on an adventure in an inhabited area, whether city, town, village, or along the roads through the countryside, will be average folk with no profession as adventurers know it, and no special abilities for clericism, fighting, magic, or thievery. They are simply typical, normal people, as you define typical and normal for the milieu, of course. When dealing with these types, it is suggested that the following factors be used. So let's show this. I gotta get my big head out the way. General classification, their hit points, and their combat ability. This is important, obviously, because this is the normal people that populate your milieu, your campaign world. Sedentary occupations are those where the individual does nothing or is a clerk, scribe, etc. Active occupations are those involving considerable movement and activity, such as a serving maid, carpenter, etc. Laboring occupations are strenuous and including farm, mining, and most menial labor tasks. Social class and rank in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. There is no random table for determination of a character's social status to be found here. That's actually in the Unearthed Arcana. This is because the inclusion of such a factor will either tell you little or nothing of useful nature, or it will abridge your freedom with respect to development of your campaign milieu. That is, if such a table tells you only a little so as not to force a social structure upon your campaign, the table can contain nothing of use. If it states rank, it presupposes you will in fact have such classes in your campaign, which you might not desire them at all. There are dozens of possible government forms, each of which will have varying social classes, ranks, or castes. Which sort you choose for your milieu is strictly your own prerogative. While this game is loosely based on feudal European technology, history, and myth, it also contains elements from the ancient period, parts of more modern myth, and the mythos of many authors as well. Within its boundaries, all sorts of societies and cultures can exist, and there is nothing to dictate that there needs to be feudal European. In The Dragon Magazine, number 25, volume 3, number 11, May 1979, there appeared an article written by me which outlines this very precept and lists a number of government forms which could be employed by the DM in his or her milieu. Actually, some, all, or none of them could appear in the world of any given campaign. To aid the harassed referee, I have listed these forms again. Additionally, a list of nobility or authorities in various medieval cultures is given. I have included the latter, as many DMs prefer to base their campaign upon a society of this sort, for they can then draw upon its historical data for game purposes. Once a set of social structures and cultures has been devised for the campaign, you may or may not find it useful to assign rank, class, or caste to player characters. Will your society have hereditary rank? Will it go only to males, females, both equally? Will only the firstborn inherit? Will any inheritance of property be required to be the entire estate to one individual? Deciding government forms and culture might well delineate much of the social structure of the nation, state, or city in question. Let us assume a social structure of an aristocracy which is non-hereditary. Members of this ruling class are those who have served in the military, own property of 100 or more acres extent, and pay an annual tax of not less than 10 gold pieces on their income. Land ownership may be waived in the case of merchants and tradesmen whose business is such that they pay not less than 20 gold pieces in taxes each year. In any event, the aristocrats are the only persons eligible for any government office, command of the military, and from their numbers are elected senators who pass laws and legislate in general. Former senators are eligible to election to various tribunals and judgeships. Former military officers are appointed by senatorial vote to keep the peace and police the land. The majority of citizens of this state are small landholders, tradesmen, and various workers. They provide the food and goods and labor which make the economy stable. These people are likewise obligated to serve in the military, and if they serve with distinction, they will be awarded land or stipends which will elevate them to the aristocracy. Of course, industry, marriage, and other means can move any of these citizens to a higher status. Only a few persons are actually enslaved, criminals and captives of war. A large number of the workers are bound to labor for a fixed period, and some must likewise serve apprenticeships. These individuals have the hope of eventually earning sufficient funds to become landowners or rich merchants or tradesmen themselves. In such a society, adventurers would come from the younger children of aristocrats, those who will inherit little and wish to remain in their favored class. Some would come from the middle group, adventurous persons who aim at becoming members of the aristocracy through success in such adventures. Few, if any, would come from the lowest class, i.e. the bondsmen and common laborers. Assigning a social class to player characters in such a society would not have any particular value unless you also devise various rivalries within the classes. With this brief example in mind, it is easy to see how pointless it is to blindly plug in a set of birth tables based on some form of hereditary quasi-European nobility, which may have absolutely no meaning within any of the states of your campaign milieu. Furthermore, any use of such material must be carefully considered, even if your campaign does have such a society and titles of rank. Viz., do you really believe that one of your player characters should be the firstborn son of a major noble or a ruler? If so, why is he adventuring? Where are his guards and retainers? Does his father know his whereabouts? If so, why is he allowing the heir to his title and estates to risk his life in such a foolish manner? Similarly, do such tables have a logical precedence and order? Are there offices which do not logically belong within a feudal society? Are there classes which are contradictory, anachronistic, or meaningless? Unless you specifically table your milieu to fit such tables, it is likely that they will be far too many yes answers to the above questions. The intelligent verdict must be that each DM has to accept the responsibility of deciding for himself or herself if assigning class distinctions is a vital part of his or her campaign. If such is necessary, then the DM must further accept the work of devising his or her own logical birth tables drawn from a society, culture, and government form developed to fit the overall milieu. This is unquestionably a tall order. Those referees who lack time will find that it is perhaps better for them to utilize one of these several campaign scenarios commercially available, adding personal touches, of course, but basically relying on the cultural and societal developments of the unit. Even with such ready-made campaign settings, you may or may not wish to include social classes immediately for player characters. My own Greyhawk campaign, for example, assumes all player characters, unless I personally place one who is otherwise, are freemen or gentlemen, or at worst, they can safely represent themselves to be so. Note that the masculine human usage is generic. I do not like the terms free creatures or gentle beings. Outstanding activity can and has brought knighthood or social status to certain characters. This was carefully planned as a reward of the characters succeeded, and it now allows them much latitude of action and assurance of reliable aid in certain realms, but it likewise has earned them the enmity of others. With all of that out of the way, consider the list of a few of the possible governmental forms, and then the list of noble official titles. So let's look at this together. Government forms. Autocracy, government which rests in self-derived absolute power, typified by a hereditary emperor, for example. Bureaucracy, governments by department, rule being through the heads of the various departments and conducted by their chief administrators. Confederacy, government by a league of possibly diverse social entities so designed as to promote the common good of each. Democracy, government by the people, i.e. the establishment body of citizens, whether through direct role or through elected representatives. Dictatorship, government whose final authority rests in the hands of one supreme head. Feudality, government of a feudal nature where each successive layer of authority derives power and authority from one above and pledges fealty likewise. Geriatocracy, government reserved to the elderly or very old. Gynarchy, government reserved to females only. Hierarchy, government which is typically religious in nature and generally similar to a feudality. Magocracy, government by professional magic users only. Matriarchy, government by the eldest females of whatever social units exist. Militocracy, government headed by the military leaders and the armed forces in general. Monarchy, government by a single sovereign, usually hereditary, with whether an absolute ruler or with power limited in some form, such as the English monarchs, limited in rule by the Magna Carta. Oligarchy, government by a few, usually absolute rulers who are co-equal. Pedocracy, government by the learned savants and scholars. Plutocracy, government by the wealthy. Republic, government by representatives of an established electorate who rule in behalf of the electors. Theocracy, government by God rule, that is, rule by the direct representative of the god. Syndicracy, government by a body of syndics, each representing some business interest. This listing is by no means exhaustive, and you should feel free to use other forms or invent your own as the need of your particular campaign directs. And then we have a nice little image of, it looks like Rome, a Roman-like era. All right. Royal and noble titles, Northern European. Emperor, Empress, King, Queen, Archbishop, Duke, Duchess, Pfalzgraf, never heard of that. Prince, Princess, Herzog, Marquis, Marquise, Margrave, Count, Earl, Countess, Graf, Bishop, Viscount, Viscountess, Waldgraf, Baron, Thane, Baroness, Abbot, Baronet, Freiherr, Seigneur, Knight, Ritter, Chevalier, Prior. Knights are non-hereditary peers. Their precedence or importance falls variously depending upon the order of knighthood they hold. Various officials of the court will rank amongst the nobility. An excellent discussion of this will be found in the Good Encyclopedia under Precedence or in the appropriate section of TSR's World of Greyhawk. Royal and noble titles, Asian forms. Padishah, Maharaja, Khakan, Tarkhan, Sultan, Shah, Raja, Ilkhan, Dey, Caliph, Bey, Orkhan, Bashaw, Pasha, Emir, Amir, Khan, Sikh, Nawab, Malik. You may find it interesting to mix titles, invent them, and place the whole in the campaign setting you devise accordingly. Research in various histories will be helpful, as will be a copy of a good thesaurus. Hey, Skull Cowboy, how you doing, man? The town and city social structure. Cities and towns have typically attracted the independent and free-thinking sorts, as they offer more opportunity for such lifestyles, even considering the medieval, rather intolerant community. In towns and cities, there are few nobles and gentlefolk of knightly status. The social structure can be shown as follows. Upper class. Nobles, gentlemen, the wealthiest of merchants, and most important, guildmasters, from which are drawn the most important lawmakers and executives. Middle class. Merchants and guildmasters with master artisans and the like making up the balance. They provide lesser officials. Lower class. Tradesmen, journeymen, laborers, and all others form the lower class. From their number is drawn the common council. This gives a typical medieval city or town government the structure which is formed of mayor, magistrate, or burgomaster, probably a lifetime office drawn only from the upper class. Aldermen, burghers, or burgesses, who are chosen by the upper class to serve as the major officers under the mayor et al., the judiciary and military commanders of the municipality are likely to fall within this stratum. Aldermen are elected by the middle class. Law enforcement officials, customs officials, and tax officials all come from the middle class too. Councillors of the Common Council are likely to be selected by the upper and middle classes as well as the free lower classes. From this class are drawn the petty officials, so roles are advisory or administrative only. The constabulary of a town or council will be drawn in part from citizen soldiers, the city watch or police force, and militia called up in times of great need. Most other soldiery, by far the bulk in most cases, will be hired mercenaries. When any army is fielded, the leading men of the city are likely to be in overall command, with assistance from mercenary captains, the force being a composite of the municipal levies and the hired soldiers. Note: such forces could be of considerable magnitude in battle, as noted by the history of London, for example, or the military history of the Hanseatic League. Economics. There is no question that the prices and costs of the game are based on inflationary economy, one where a sudden influx of silver and gold has driven everything well beyond its normal value. The reasoning behind this is simple. An active campaign will most certainly bring a steady flow of wealth into the base area as adventurers come from successful trips into dungeon and wilderness. If the economy of the area is one which more accurately reflects that of medieval England, let us say, where coppers and silver coins are usual and a gold piece remarkable, such an influx of new money, even in copper and silver, would cause an inflationary spiral. This would necessitate you adjusting costs accordingly and then upping dungeon treasures somewhat to keep pace. If a near maximum is assumed, then the economics of the area can remain relatively constant, and the DM will have to adjust costs only for things in demand or short supply: weapons, oil, holy water, men-at-arms, whatever. The economic system of areas beyond the more active campaign areas can be viably based on lesser wealth only until the stream of loot begins to pour outwards into them. While it is possible to reduce treasure in these areas to some extent so as to prolong the period of lower costs, what kind of a dragon horde, for example, doesn't have gold and gems? It's simply more heroic for players to have their characters swaggering around with pouches full of gems and tossing out gold pieces than it is for them to have coppers. Heroic fantasy is made of fortunes and king's ransoms in loot gained most cleverly and bravely, and lost in a twinkling by various means: thievery, gambling, debauchery, gift-giving, bribes, and so forth. The reality AD&D seeks to create through role-playing is that of the mythic heroes such as Conan, Fjord, and the Grey Mouser, Kothar, Elric, and their ilk. When treasure is spoken of, it is more stirring when participants know it to be treasure. You may, of course, adjust any prices and costs as you see fit for your own milieu. Be careful to observe the effects of such changes on both play balance and player involvement. If any adverse effects are noted, it's better to return to the tried and true. It is fantastic and of heroic proportions so as to match its game vehicle. Duties, excises, fees, tariffs, taxes, tithes, and tolls. What society can exist without revenues? What better means of assuring revenues than taxation? And all the names used in the title of this section are synonymous with taxes. But if it is called something different, perhaps the populace won't take too much umbrage and having to pay and pay and pay. It is important in most campaigns to take excess monies away from player characters, and taxation is one of the better means of accomplishing this end. The form and frequency of taxing depends upon the locale and the social structure. Duties are typically paid on goods brought into a country or subdivision thereof, so any furs, tapestries, etc. brought into a town for sale will probably be subject to duty. Excises are typically sums paid to belong to a particular profession or practice a certain calling. In addition, an excise can be levied against foreign currency, for example, in order to exchange it into the less remarkable coin of the realm. Fees can be levied for just about any reason. Entering a city gate is a good one for non-citizens. Tariffs are much the same as duties, but let us suppose that this is levied against only certain items when purchased. Rather a surtax, or it can be used against goods not covered by the duty list. Taxes are typically paid only by residents and citizens of the municipality and include those sums for upkeep of roads and streets walls, gates, and municipal expenses for administration and services. Taxation is not necessarily an annual affair, for special taxes can be levied whenever needful, particularly upon sales, services, and foreigners in general. Tithes are principally religious taxation, although there is no prohibition against the combination of the secular with the sacred in the municipality. Thus, a tithe can be extracted from all sums brought into the community by any resident, the monies going to the religious organization sponsored by the community or to that of the character's choosing at your option. Of course, any religious organizations within a municipality will have to pay heavy taxes unless they are officially recognized by the authorities. Tolls, finally, are sums paid for the use of a road, bridge, ferry, etc. They are paid according to the numbers of persons, animals, carts, wagons, and possibly even materials transported. If the gentle reader thinks that taxation he or she currently undergoes is a trifle strenuous for his or her income, pity the typical European populace for the Middle Ages. They paid all of the above, tolls being very frequent, with those trying to escape them by use of a byway being subject to confiscation of all goods, with a fine and imprisonment possible also. Every petty noble made an extraction, municipalities taxed, and the sovereign was the worst of all. Eventually, merchants banded together to form associations to protect themselves from such robbery, but peasants and other commoners could only revolt and dream of better times. Barter was common because hard money was so rare. However, in the typical fantasy milieu, we deal with great sums of precious metals, so use levies against player character gains accordingly. Here is an example of a system which might be helpful for you in developing your own. The town charges a 1% duty on all normal goods brought into the place for sale: foodstuffs, clothing and hides, livestock, raw materials, and manufactured goods. Foreigners must also pay this duty, but at double rates, 2%. Luxury items and precious goods, wines, spirits, furs, metals such as gold, copper, etc., jewelry and the like, pay a tariff in addition to the duty of 5% of value charge if such are to be sold, and special forms for sale are then given to the person so declaring as wares, otherwise no legal sale is possible. Entry fee into the town is 1 copper piece per head, man or animal, or wheel for citizens, 5 coppers for non-citizens, unless they have official passports to allow free entry. Diplomatic types have immunity from duties and tariffs as regards to their personal goods and belongings. Taxes are paid per head, annually at 1 copper for a peasant, 1 silver for a freeman, and 1 gold piece for a gentleman or noble. Most foreign residents are stopped frequently and asked for proof of payment, and if this is not at hand, they must pay again. In addition, a 10% sales tax is charged to all foreigners, although no service tax is levied upon them. Religion is not regulated by the municipality, but any person seeking to gain services from such an organization must typically pledge to tithe. Finally, several tolls are extended in order to gain access to the main route from and to the municipality, including the route to the dungeon, of course. Citizens of the town must pay a 5% tax on their property in order to defray the costs of the place. The sum is levied annually. Citizenship can be obtained by foreigners after residence for 1 month and the payment of 10 gold pieces plus many bribes. The town does not encourage the use of foreign currency. Merchants and other business people must pay a fine of 5% of the value of any foreign coins within their possession, plus face certain confiscation of the coins, so they will typically not accept them. Upon entering the town, non-residents are instructed to go to the street of the money changers in order to trade their foreign money for the copper cons, silver knobs, gold orbs, and platinum royals. Exchange rate is a mere 90%, so for 10 foreign copper pieces, 9 domestic copper commons are handed out. Any non-resident with more than 100 silver nobles value in foreign coins in his or her possession is automatically fined 50% of their total value, unless he or she can prove their entry into the town was within 24 hours and he or she was on his or her way to the money changers when stopped. Transactions involving gems are not uncommon, but a surtax of 10% is also levied against sales or exchanges of precious stones and similar goods. monster populations, and placement. As the creator of a milieu, you will have to spend a considerable amount of time developing the population and distribution of monsters, in dungeon and wilderness and in urban areas as well. It is highly recommended that you develop an overall scheme for both population and habitation. This is not to say that a random mixture of monsters cannot be used, simply selecting whatever creatures are at hand from the tables of monsters shown by level of their relative challenge. The latter method does provide a rather fun type of campaign with a Disneyland atmosphere, but long-range play becomes difficult, for the whole lacks rhyme and reason, so it becomes difficult for the DM to extrapolate new scenarios from it, let alone build upon it. Therefore, it is better to use the random population technique only in certain areas, and even then, do so with reason. This will be discussed shortly. In general, the monster population will be in its habitat for a logical reason. The environment suits the creatures, and the whole is in balance. Certain areas will be filled with nasty things due to the effects of some character to protect his or her stronghold due to the influence of some powerful evil or good force, and so on. Except in the latter cases, when adventurers, your player characters, their henchmen characters and hirelings, move into an area and begin to slaughter the creatures therein, it will become devoid of monsters. Natural movement of monsters will be slow, so there will be no immediate migration to any depopulated area, unless some power is restocking it or there is an excess population nearby which is able to take advantage of the newly available habitat. Actually clearing an area, dungeon, or outdoor territory might involve many expeditions and much effort, perhaps even a minor battle or two involving hundreds per side. But when it is all over, the monsters will not magically reappear, nor will it be likely that some other creatures will move into the newly available quarters the next day. When player characters begin adventuring, they will at first assume that they are the most aggressive types in the area with respect to characters. Of course, this is probably true. You have other characters in the area, of course, and certainly many of them will be higher level and more capable of combating monsters than are the new player characters. Nonetheless, the game assumes that these characters have other things to do with their time. They do not generally care to take the risks connected with adventuring, and they will happily allow the player characters to stand the hazards. If the characters who do the dirty work are successful, the area will be free of monsters, and the non-player characters will benefit. Meanwhile, the player characters, as adventurers, automatically remove themselves to an area where there are monsters, effectively getting rid of the potential threat their presence poses to the established order. There's an analogy to the gunfighter lawman of the Wild West, which is not inappropriate. In some cases, the player characters will establish strongholds nearby, which will help to maintain the stability of the area, thus becoming part of the establishment. Your milieu might actually encourage such settlement and interaction if you favor politics in your campaign. The depopulation and removal to fresh challenge areas has an advantage in most cases. As DM, you will probably have a number of different and exciting dungeons in wilderness and urban settings which are tied into the whole of the milieu. Depopulation of one simply means that the player characters must move on to a fresh area. Interesting to them because it's different from the last. Fun for you as there are new areas and challenges which you desire your players to deal with. Variety is, after all, the spice of AD&D life too. It becomes particularly interesting for all parties concerned when it is a meaningful part of the whole. As the players examine first one facet, then another of the milieu gem, they will become more and more taken with its complexity and beauty and wish to see the whole in true perspective. Certainly each will wish to possess it, but none ever will. Variety of setting is easily done by sketching the outlines of your world's history, establishing power bases, setting up conflicts, distributing the creatures, bordering the states, and so forth gives the basis for a reasoned, if not totally logical in terms of our real world, approach. The multitude of planes and alignments are given for such a purpose, although they also serve to provide fresh places to adventure and establish conflicts between player characters as well. Certain pre-done modules might serve in your milieu, and you should consider their inclusion in light of your overall schema. If they fit smoothly into the diagram of your milieu, by all means, use them. but always alter them to include the personality of your campaign so the mesh is perfect. Likewise, fit monsters and magic so as to be reasonable within the scope of your milieu and the particular facet of it concerned. Alter creatures freely, remembering balance. Hit dice, armor class, attacks, and damage, magical and psionic powers are all mutable, and after players become used to the standard types, a few ringers will make them a bit less sure of things. Devise a few creatures unique to your world is also recommended. As a DM, you are capable of doing a proper job of it, provided you have had some hours of hard experience with rapacious players. Then you will know not to design pushovers and can resist the temptation to develop the perfect player character killer. In order to offer a bit more guidance, this single example of population and placement will suffice. In a border area of hills and wild forests, where but a few human settlements exist, there is a band of very rich but hard-pressed dwarves. They and the humans are hard-pressed because of the existence of a large tribe of orcs. The latter have invited numbers of ogres to join them, for the resistance of the men and dwarves to the orcs' looting and pillaging has cost them not a few warriors. The orcs are gaining. More areas nearby are becoming wilderness, and into abandoned countryside and deserted mines the ferocious and dark-dwelling monsters of wilderness and dungeons daily creep. The brave party of adventurers comes into a small village to see what's going on, for they have heard that all is not well hereabouts. With but little help, they must then overcome the nasties by piecemeal tactics, being careful not to arouse the whole to general warfare by appearing too strong. This example allows you to develop a logical and ordered placement of the major forces of monsters to develop habitat complexes and modules of various sorts, abandoned towns, temples, etc. It also allows some freewheeling mixture of random critters to be stuck in here and there to add uncertainty and spice to the standard challenge of masses of orcs and ogres. You, of course, can make it as complex and varied as you wish to suit your campaign and players, and perhaps a demon or devil and some powerful evil clerics are in order. Just as you have matrices for each of your dungeon levels, prepare the data sheets for all areas of your outdoors and urban areas. When monsters are properly placed, note on a key sheet who, what, and when with regard to any replacement. It is certainly more interesting and challenging for players when they find that monsters do not spring up like weeds overnight in dungeons or elsewhere. Once all dragons in an area are slain, they have run out of dragons. The likelihood of one flying by becomes virtually nil. The frontier moves, and bold adventurers must move with it. The movement can, of course, be towards them, as inimical forces roll over civilization. Make it all fit together in your plan, and your campaign will be assured of long life. Hey, Blackbane, old school's the best school. Placement of monetary treasure. Wealth abounds. It is simply awaiting the hand bold and strong enough to take it. This precept is basic to fantasy adventure gaming. Can you imagine Fard and the Grey Mouser without a rich prize to aim for? I don't even know if I'm saying that right. Fafhrd. I have no idea how to say that. Conan without a pouch of rare jewels to squander. And are not there dragons with great hoards? Tombs with fantastic wealth and fell guardians. Rapacious giants with spoils. Dwarven mines brimming with gems. Leprechauns with pots of gold. Why, the list goes on and on. The foregoing is, of course, true, but the matter is not as simple as it might seem on the surface. First, we must consider the logic of the game. By adventuring, slaying monsters, or outwitting opponents, and by gaining treasures, the characters operate within the milieu advance in ability and gain levels of experience. While AD&D is not quite so simplistic as other such games as regarding such advancement, it nonetheless relies upon the principle of adventuring and success thereat to bestow such awards upon player characters and henchmen alike. It is therefore incumbent upon the creator of the milieu and the arbiter of the campaign, the dungeon master, to follow certain guidelines and charges placed upon him or her by these rules and apply them with intelligence in the spirit of the whole, as befits the campaign milieu to which they are being applied. A brief perusal of the character experience point totals necessary to advance in levels makes it abundantly clear that an underlying precept of the game is that the amount of treasure obtainable by characters is graduated from small to large as experience level increases. This most certainly does not intimate or suggest that the greater treasure should be in the hundreds of thousands of gold pieces in value, at least not in readily transportable form in any event, but that subject will be discussed a bit later. First and foremost, we must consider the placement of the modest treasures, which are appropriate to the initial stages of a campaign. All monsters would not and should not possess treasure. I'm going to say that again. All monsters would not and should not possess treasure. The treasure types given in the monster manual are the optimums and are meant to consider the maximum number of creatures guarding them. Many of the monsters shown are possessing some form of wealth, are quite unlikely to have any at all. This is not a contradiction in the rules, but an admonition to the DM not to give away too much. Any treasure possessed by weak, low-level monsters will be trifling compared to what numbers of stronger monsters might guard. So in distributing wealth amongst the creatures which inhabit the upper levels of dungeon or dungeon-like areas, as well as for petty monsters dwelling in small numbers in the wilderness, assign it accordingly. The bulk of such treasure will be copper pieces and silver. Perhaps there will be a bit of ivory or a cunningly crafted item worth a few gold pieces. Electrum will be most unusual, gold rare, and scarcer still will be platinum pieces or a small gem. Rarest of all, treasure of treasures, the magic item, is detailed hereafter, placement of magic items. If some group of creatures actually has a treasure of 11 gold pieces, another will have 2,000 coppers, and yet a third nothing save a few rusty weapons. Of course, all the treasure is not in precious metals or rare or finely made substances. Is not a suit of armor of great value? What of a supply of oil, a vial of holy water, weapons, provisions, animals? The upper levels of a dungeon need not be stuffed like a piggy bank to provide meaningful treasure to a clever player character. Assign each monster treasure or lack thereof with reason. The group of brigands has been successful of late, and each has had a few coppers left from roistering, while the leader actually has a small sum of silver hidden away, coupled with salvaged armor, weapons, and any odd supplies or animals they might have around. This will be a rich find indeed. The giant rats have nothing at all, save a nasty, filthy bite. But the centipedes living beneath a pile of rotting furniture did for an incautious adventure some years ago, and his skeletal remains are visible still, one hand thrust beneath the debris of the nest. Hidden from view is a silver bracelet with an agate, the whole thing being valued at 20 gold pieces. Thus, intelligent monsters, or those which have an affinity for bright, shiny objects, will consciously gather and hoard treasures. Others will possibly have some as an incidental reminder of their natural hunting or self-defense or aggressive behavior or whatever. Naturally, some monsters will be so unfortunate as to have nothing of value at all, despite their desire to the contrary. But these creatures might know of other monsters, whom they hate and envy, who do have wealth. In more inaccessible regions, there will be stronger monsters, whether due to numbers or individual prowess as immaterial. These creatures will have more treasure, at least those with any at all. Copper will give way to silver, silver to electrum, electrum to gold. Everyday objects which can be sold off for a profit, the armor and weapons and such like, will be replaced by silks, brocades, tapestries, and similar items. Ivory and spices, furs and bronze statues, platinum, gems, and jewelry will trickle upward from the depths of a dungeon or in from the fastness of the wilderlands. But hold! This is not a signal to begin throwing heaps of treasure at players, as if you were some mad Midas hating what he had created by his touch. Always bear in mind the effect that that the successful gaining of any treasure or set of treasures will have upon a player character and the campaign as a whole. Consider this example. A pair of exceedingly large, powerful, and ferocious ogres has taken up the abode in a chamber at the base of a shaft which gives to the land above. From here, they raid both the upper lands and the dungeons round about. These creatures have accumulated over 2,000 gold pieces in wealth, but it is obviously not in a pair of 1,000 gold piece gems. Rather, they have gathered an assortment of goods which combined value is well in excess of 2,000 gold nobles, the coin of the realm. Rather than stalking a treasure which the victorious player character can easily gather and carry to the surface, you maximize the challenge by making it one which ogres will naturally accrue in the process of their raiding. There are many coppers and silver coins in a large locked iron chest. There are pewter vessels worth a few number of silver pieces. An inlaid wooden coffer worth 100 gold pieces alone holds a finely wrought silver necklace worth an incredible 350 gold pieces. Food and other provisions scattered about amount to another 100 or so gold nobles' value, and one of the ogres wears a badly tanned fern cape, which will fetch 50 gold pieces nevertheless. Finally, there are several good helmets used as drinking cups, a bardish, and a two-handed sword where silver wire wrapped around its hilt and a lapis lazuli pommel to make it worth 3 times its normal value, which completes the treasure. If the adventurers overcome the ogres, they must still recognize all of the items of value and transport them to the surface. What is left behind will be taken by other residents of the netherworld in no time at all, so the bold victors will have quite a task before them. It did not end with a mere slaying of ogres. In like manner, the hoard of a dragon could destroy a campaign if the treasure of Smaug in The Hobbit were to be used as an example of what such a trove should contain. Not so for the wise DM. He or she will place a few choice and portable items, some not so choice because they are difficult to carry off, and finally top, or rather bottom and top, the whole with mounds, piles, and layers of copper pieces, silver, etc. There will be much there, but even the cleverest of players will be more than hard to put to figure out a way to garner the bulk of it after driving off, subduing, or slaying the treasure's guardian. Many other avaricious monsters are eagerly awaiting the opportunity to help themselves to an unguarded dragon horde, and news travels fast. Who will stay behind to mine the coins while the rest of the party goes off to dispose of the better parts of the loot? Not their henchmen. What a problem. In the event that generosity should overcome you, and you find that in a moment of weakness you actually allowed too much treasure to fall into the player's hands, there are steps which must be taken to rectify matters. The player characters themselves could become attractive to others seeking such gains. The local rulers will desire a share. Prices will rise for services and demand from these now wealthy personages, etc. All this is not to actually penalize success. It is a logical abstraction of their actions. It stimulates them to adventure anew, and it also maintains the campaign in balance. These rules will see to it that experience levels are not gained too quickly as long as you do your part as a DM. All right, we're going to stop there because I don't think I can finish the next section in the time I have left. I only got an hour today. The old books enhance the vocabulary. Yeah, for sure. And not only that, Blackbane, these old books remind you of aspects of the campaign that you tend to forget. If you just run modules over and over and over again, you never really think about economy. You're just thinking of A to B to C for the campaign. Unless it's an old school campaign, in which case there is like a home base and they're moving out from it. But, the whole idea of hiring hirelings or extra help and then also having your own keep or some sort of home base, as it were, that you run, that's a very old school mentality. And they tried to bring it back in D&D 2024 with, what did they call it? Like the home base thing where you can like have a sort of soft campaign with just upkeep of your home. But the reality is if you're running a campaign, you don't really have time to deal with the home base stuff in, modern adventure campaigns. It's just not built for that in mind. And it's certainly not built with henchmen in mind. So that's why I love these old school books so much. They completely recontextualize the game for me every single time I go back to them. And it never fails to bring up ideas and thoughts that I had either never had originally or completely forgot about because I've been playing newer editions for so long. And that's why I love going back to AD&D and I love playing AD&D because it does make you think of the game in a completely different way than modern versions of the game ever have. And that's including second edition, by the way, of AD&D. So anyway, that's why I love this stuff. Thank you guys so much. That's going to do it for this episode of Gaming Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. We will be coming back and picking up with the rest of the campaign section and moving on, of course, to other stuff as well. But that's going to do it. What did you think about the campaign section? Have you ever thought about monster ecology and monster treasure hoarding? Let me know in the comments below. Of course, you can always email me at info@dealsaga.com. If you enjoyed these episodes, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss what's next. And if you appreciate the projects I produce, become a member on YouTube or a patron on Patreon. Thank you to creator patron Aaron Hardy and developer patron Chris Androu. This channel is all about celebrating the wonderful world of the DragonLance Saga, and I hope you join me in the celebration. Thank you for watching. This has been Adam with DragonLance Saga, and until next time, Slán Javar.